Look at the corner of your room, perhaps near the wardrobe or tucked behind a desk that has become a dumping ground for good intentions. There lies the graveyard of your past selves. It is the acoustic guitar you bought 3 years ago, the one you practiced with feverish intensity for 3 weeks until your fingertips bled, only to let it gather dust once the calluses faded. It is the sketchbook filled with charcoal drawings of eyes and hands, abandoned halfway through because the anatomy didn't look right. It is the expensive camera lens, the coding bootcamp login credentials, the sourdough starter that long ago turned to vinegar, and the stack of books on French philosophy that you promised to read but never cracked past the introduction. When you look at these objects, you do not just see clutter. You see a silent, screaming indictment. They are physical evidence of what you believe to be your fatal flaw. A voice in your head, perhaps sounding like a disappointed parent or a cynical boss, whispers that you are incapable of commitment. It tells you that you are a person of shallow waters, skating across the surface of life without ever diving deep enough to find the pearl. You watch your peers, the ones who chose a lane at 22 and stayed there, climbing the corporate ladders, accumulating titles, becoming senior this and head of that. They seem like oak trees, solid, rooted, growing vertically toward a clear patch of sky. And you feel like a tumbleweed, blown by the winds of whimsy, gathering nothing but the debris of unfinished projects. The guilt you feel is heavy, a dull ache in the chest that wakes you at 3 a.m., wondering if you are broken, wondering why you cannot just pick a thing and stick to it. But let us sit with this feeling for a moment. Let us suspend the judgment of the modern world and look at this trait through a different lens, one that is polished by history and biology rather than the metrics of LinkedIn. What if I told you that this restlessness, this inability to tolerate the monotony of a single path, is not a defect? What if I told you that the shame you carry is a cultural fabrication, a lie sold to you by an industrial machine that requires cogs, not creators? To understand why you are the way you are, we must strip away the concrete and glass of the city and return to the cradle of our species. We must look at the evolutionary biology of the human mind. For the vast majority of human history, specialization was not a strategy for success. It was a recipe for extinction. In the unpredictable environments of the Pleistocene era, the specialist, the individual who could only do one thing perfectly, was the first to die when the climate shifted, if you were the best mammoth hunter in the tribe. But the mammoths migrated and you didn't know how to fish, forage for tubers, or read the weather patterns, you perished. Your brain, the one you chastise for being scattered, is actually a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering, known as optimal foraging. In nature, animals must decide when to stay in a food patch and when to move on. If a bird stays in a bush until every last berry is eaten, it wastes energy searching for diminishing returns. The most successful survivors are those with a neurochemical trigger that signals, "This patch is depleted. The easy resources are gone. Move, explore, adapt." This is the biological root of your boredom. When you pick up a new hobby, say watercolor painting, your brain is flooded with dopamine. This is the acquisition phase. You are mapping a new territory, learning the physics of water and pigment. But once you understand the fundamental mechanism, once the steep learning curve flattens out, your brain cuts the dopamine supply. It is not because you are lazy, it is because, evolutionarily speaking, you have harvested the essential information from that patch. Your ancient wise biology is telling you that to continue drilling down into this one tiny skill would be an inefficient use of your cognitive energy. It urges you to scan the horizon for the next challenge. You are not suffering from a deficit of attention. You are exhibiting an abundance of curiosity, a trait called neophilia, the love of the new. This trait is what pushed our ancestors out of the caves, across the land bridges, and into every corner of the globe. You are the descendant of the explorers, the scouts, and the polymaths who kept the tribe alive by knowing a little bit about everything. However, we no longer live in the wild. We live in a world designed by the Industrial Revolution, a world that worships the assembly line. The architecture of modern society is built on the foundation of the division of labor. From the moment you entered the school system, you were groomed for narrowness. The education system is a funnel designed to trim away your broad interests until you fit into a specific economic slot. We are taught that the purpose of life is to find a niche, to monetize it, and to repeat the same set of actions for 40 years until we are granted the permission to rest. This is where the specialist trap closes around your neck. We live in a culture that views depth as the only form of virtue and breadth as a form of dilettantism. We have pathologized the generalist. We use words like flaky, undisciplined, and unfocused to describe minds that are simply functioning as high-speed synthesis engines. The guilt you feel is the friction between your hunter-gatherer brain and a factory farm society. You are a bird trying to understand why you cannot grow roots like an oak tree, forgetting that you were made for flight, not for stasis. Consider the immense pressure of hustle culture and the Western obsession with monetizing every breath we take. In this hyper-capitalist framework, a hobby is only valid if it becomes a side hustle. You cannot simply enjoy baking. You must start a micro-bakery. You cannot simply enjoy writing poetry. You must publish a collection. We have destroyed the concept of the amateur. The word amateur comes from the Latin amator, meaning lover. An amateur is one who does something for the sheer love of it, without the transaction of commerce. But because you have internalized the market's voice, you feel that if a pursuit doesn't lead to a career or a paycheck, it was a waste of time. This creates a tragic cycle. You start something with joy. The world asks, where is this going? You feel the pressure to professionalize. The joy evaporates because the activity is no longer play. It is labor. So you quit. And then you label yourself a failure. But you did not fail. You simply finished the cycle of curiosity. You extracted the nectar and were ready to fly to the next flower. But the world told you that you were supposed to buy the flower shop. The pain of the generalist is also a pain of identity. At dinner parties, when someone asks the dreaded question, "What do you do?" you freeze. The specialist has a ready-made script. I am a cardiologist. I am a tax attorney. Their identity is a solid, recognizable object. But for you, the answer is a nebula. How do you explain that you are a graphic designer who is currently obsessed with mycology, writes code on the weekends, and is researching the history of the Silk Road? You feel the need to shrink yourself, to edit out the irrelevant parts of your soul just to be palatable, just to be understood. You perform a lobotomy on your own complexity to fit into the small boxes of social expectation. This is a form of intellectual isolation that is rarely discussed. The loneliness of having a mind that speaks a language of connections in a world that only understands the language of separation. But here is the reframe, the shift in perspective that can liberate you from this prison of guilt. We are entering a new era. The age of the specialist is beginning to fracture. In a world increasingly dominated by artificial intelligence, the narrow technical skills are the easiest to automate. An AI can diagnose a rare disease faster than a doctor. It can draft a contract faster than a lawyer. It can write code faster than a developer. The deep, narrow vertical is where the machines thrive. What the machines cannot do, at least not yet, and not with the human spark, is synthesis. They cannot easily replicate the erratic, intuitive leaps of the generalist. The future belongs to the M-shaped individual, the person who has not just one peak of expertise, but multiple peaks across different disciplines, connected by a valley of broad understanding. The future belongs to the person who can combine the logic of a programmer with the empathy of a novelist and the visual sense of an architect. This is the alchemy of synthesis. Your graveyard of hobbies is not a pile of waste. It is a compost heap of innovation. Every time you quit something, you walk away with a micro-mastery, a unique mental model, a new vocabulary. You may have stopped playing the violin, but the weeks you spent learning it gave you an intuitive understanding of resonance and timing that you now apply to your video editing. You may have abandoned the study of botany, but the way you learn to classify systems now informs how you organize data in your marketing job. Nothing is ever lost. The generalist does not build a tower, they weave a tapestry. You are collecting threads of different colors, textures, and strengths. To the outside observer, it looks like a mess of tangled yarn. But to you, as you age and mature, you begin to see the pattern emerging. You are the only one who can weave these disparate elements into a cohesive whole. So, how do we live this truth? How do we stop the bleeding of self-esteem? First, we must rebrand the act of quitting. Let us call it graduation. When you feel that itch to move on, do not view it as a defect of will. View it as a graduation ceremony. You have completed the curriculum you set for yourself. You came to learn how it works, not to do it forever. Give yourself permission to be a serial beginner. There is a profound humility and bravery in being a beginner over and over again. It keeps the neuroplasticity of the brain alive. While the specialist calcifies in their expertise, becoming rigid and fearful of change, you remain fluid, youthful, and adaptive. Second, embrace the concept of seasons. A tree does not bear fruit all year round. It has seasons of growth, seasons of harvest, and seasons of dormancy. Your life is not a linear sprint, it is cyclical. You can have a season of music followed by a season of code. You can return to old hobbies years later with fresh eyes. The guitar in the corner is not dead, it is merely dormant, waiting for its next season. By viewing your interest as cyclical rather than terminal, you remove the finality of quitting. Third, consider the portfolio life. Instead of trying to squeeze your multifaceted soul into a single job title, construct a life where you have multiple streams of engagement. Perhaps you earn money one way, find meaning another way, and find community a third way. You do not need one career to be your everything. You are a curator of a gallery of experiences. And finally, start keeping a commonplace book. This is an ancient practice used by Leonardo da Vinci, Marcus Aurelius, and Virginia Woolf. It is a central repository, a notebook or a digital file, where you dump everything. The quotes from the books you read, the sketches of the ideas you had, the random facts about bees or brutalist architecture. When you externalize your chaotic interests into a single physical space, you stop seeing them as scattered debris and start seeing them as a body of work. You begin to see the connections. You realize that your interest in history and your interest in psychology are actually the same interest, the study of human nature. You realize that your flaws are actually the raw materials of a unique philosophy. You must forgive yourself for not being an oak tree. The world has enough oaks. The world has enough people who stand in one place, digging deeper and deeper into the same soil. We need the birds. We need the cross-pollinators. We need the minds that can fly from the forest to the mountain to the sea, carrying seeds of ideas that would otherwise never meet. The next time you look at that dusty guitar, do not apologize to it. Thank it. Thank it for the song it taught you, even if it was only one song. Thank it for the dexterity it gave your fingers. And then, without a shred of guilt, turn your gaze to the next horizon, to the next shiny, fascinating thing that catches the light. You are not lost. You are simply exploring a map that is far larger than the one they gave you at birth. You are free.